everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a review of the brand new film Oppenheimer, which opened up last night. As you all know, I went to go see the trash fire that was Barbie because Oppenheimer is a 3-hour movie, and it's a film that was made specifically for IMAX, and so I went to the 10:30 early screening this morning at one of my local theaters in IMAX, and I'm going to go ahead and share my thoughts about it. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, that fire button, Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So we got Oppenheimer from director Christopher Nolan. As many of you know, his last project was the film Tenet, which had a lot of controversy surrounding it because the sound mixing on that film was pretty atrocious. The vast majority of people that went to go see Tenet were not able to understand what was being said. What I can say positively about Oppenheimer, especially when it comes to the sound mixing, is that it is significantly better. That all being said, it is still a problem. There are several scenes where there are things going on, but the sound of the music is either too loud, there's too much stuff going on where you can't understand. And this is not, again, the moments where there are, again, these moments do exist, where you're not really supposed to hear what's going on, you're not really supposed to hear the conversations that are being had, right? When those moments are there, you pretty much can't hear anything other than just the loud noises. Whereas in this movie, you do have these moments where you're having these conversations in front of you, and because of the way that the sound is mixed, and this is, again, something that, Nolan's been notorious for a long, long time, but it just definitely feels as if it's become worse and worse as he has gotten older and as he has made more and more movies. I think the peak and the pinnacle of it, as far as just how bad it got, was with Tenet, and that movie, I remember, had to going in hyper-focused. I have ADHD, and so one of the things that you can do with ADHD is you can go in and have moments of hyperfocus. You don't have full control over it, but I was able to understand 95% of that movie, but most people could not. Luckily with this movie, not going in hyperfocus, I was still also able to recognize probably about 95% of the movie, but there is still that percentage, right, a very small percentage of the film where you might need to just be aware that, especially if you're on an IMAX screen, the sound mixing will definitely favor the ethereal sounds, will favor crowd noise, will favor the actual score of the film significantly better. Now, what I can say is the score, though, is phenomenal. The score of this movie is absolutely fantastic, and I think that that is something that a lot of people are probably going to walk away from, especially as the movie goes on and on and on. The score just gets that much more powerful and that much more impactful on the actual story itself. With the story, I will say this: it takes a long time to get started. The first hour or so, to be perfectly frank, was pretty boring. It was pretty by the numbers. It was it was just very generic, very slow. And also, it really showcased how Nolan was moving very, very quickly. There were a lot of quick edits, quick movements to different parts, different moments in time, in such a way where you're like, this is a 3-hour movie. I don't have to be rushing this story. You don't have to be rushing the narrative that's being told on screen. You can take your time, Nolan. All right, calm down, buddy. You could take your time. But unfortunately, that first hour really just does kind of feel like you're just thrown into it. And I just honestly think that some of the editing, especially in the pacing, is not really up to standard. It's not really up to the Christopher Nolan films that I have grown to know and love. It almost reminds me a little bit about what my general thoughts on Dunkirk were. I was not a big fan of Dunkirk. I know that some people were, but one of the issues that film had was also issues with pacing. And I think that this film's first hour especially is played with that. Once you actually get into the development of the atom bomb, when you actually get into the Manhattan Project, that's when things really start to actually get going, not only from a music standpoint, but also from a narrative standpoint. It was from that moment that I honestly felt like I was finally invested. It really, honestly, really wasn't until probably the last 45 minutes to an hour that I thought it was the best part of the movie. And I know some people have said that the end of the movie was one of their least favorite parts. It was actually one of my favorites because you actually felt like all of the stakes that had been set up in the beginning were finally coming to fruition. You honestly felt like something was at stake. The score starts to swell. It starts to build up the tension. You're on the edge of your seat, even though we have an idea of what's going to happen on screen because this is all now a part of history. You are still at that moment where you're like, I just don't know what is necessarily going to happen or how Nolan is going to present this image, right? And you especially have this great buildup to the actual bomb explosion itself, and then you have the actual explosion, which was, again, brilliant. The fact that he was able to use pretty much all practical effects as far as the explosion itself, but also just the filmmaking process was brilliant. was absolutely brilliant for him to be able to actually pull that off. But also just as thrilling, if not even more thrilling, was when you then got after that to where you start to get into what you've been going back and forth between, right? This film is going back and forth between different times in history. A lot of that is presented based on whether you're watching the black and white film stock or whether you're seeing the color film stock. By the way, shout out to Nolan for being able to essentially have created out of thin air, never before had existed, black and white IMAX film. Very cool that they were able to do that, and it looked beautiful on screen. But you have this back and forth going on, and it does get a bit confusing. And so when you finally get to this end point where you're really spending a lot more time with this Senate confirmation hearing for one of the characters played by Robert Downey Jr., brilliantly played by Robert Downey Jr. Acting throughout this movie is absolutely fantastic. But it's not really until then that you honestly get, I think, one of the more edge of your seat moments, right? And when that is actually even more thrilling and even more captivating than the actual bomb itself in certain respects, again, I think that also kind of speaks to how this movie, even though it is 3 hours, and even though Nolan has always been known for being, I think, a very good storyteller, I just don't think that this story is told nearly as well as it could have been. I think that once again, Nolan, and I feel like this has kind of been a part of his more recent career path, he's kind of fallen by the wayside, right? He's kind of searching for that voice. He almost gets caught up in a way with trying to do too much, to try to do too many things. And honestly, there were moments where I sat back and said, this just feels like Oscar bait to me, right? The way that it was being shot, the way that it was being cut and edited, and the way he's going back and forth in time, it didn't feel like it was a creative narrative element anymore. And again, that's something that maybe some people will be able to walk away with, but all I could think about was, okay, I could see how your stereotypical standard Oscar voter would actually appreciate that, right? But it almost had that indie type feel, that indie type feel to it, right? Which doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it is also something to where I don't think that it lives up to some of Nolan's better movies. So granted, I think that this film will definitely be better received by more people than Tenet was, especially since you can go in and not have to hyper-focus to understand the dialogue and what's actually going on. I do think that ultimately Nolan is in a position where he might need to start just rethinking some things. Again, he's doing amazing work, and that's why I still do really like this movie. There are so many great things. The cinematography is beautiful. The acting is fantastic. Those moments, as I mentioned, the build-up to the bomb and also the build-up to the ending of the whole Senate confirmation hearing, those are brilliant moments of acting, brilliant moments of writing too, and pacing, and that was what I wish the entire rest of the movie had been. Instead, it just felt jumbled, especially in that first hour with all this jumping back and forth in time. And again, having these different connections being made in such a way where you just feel like you're getting exposition that's not really building much up to anything else. I think that this script probably could have gotten a once-over, and you probably could have cut a good 25-30 minutes out and had a much more succinct plot, and also had maybe a better editor in the room too. And again, maybe this goes back more so to Nolan than the editor, but maybe fixing those pacing issues, not having it be as jumbled. There's actually even one moment where I thought, well, that was a weird edit, where essentially you get to this moment where the screen fades to black, and it fades in such a way where you're like, well, I know this is not the end of the movie because it's not been 3 hours yet, but it's almost as if it was cut that way. And no other point of the movie has that. And so it just feels very, very awkward. It feels very weird. So basically, that's all to say that Oppenheimer is definitely a solid movie, and I think that some people are going to walk away with it loving it a heck of a lot more than I have. I already know that many people have walked away loving it a lot more than I did, but I ultimately think that this is not going to be nearly as popular of a movie when everything is said and done. I still very much long for the days of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, right? Where those, I think, were just very crisp, well-told stories that were said and told in a way where you could just sit back and not only enjoy it and understand it, but also get something extra about it, right? Get that extra Nolan factor. And it's just sad that we've kind of gotten to this point where it almost feels like Nolan is just continuing to try to outdo himself in different ways, and it's focused more on that than on actually telling a story well. It's not that he doesn't tell a good story. It's not that the things going on screen are bad. It's just that if his focus instead was on the actual storytelling and not as much on the visuals and everything like that, if he was able to find a better balance, a better mix, especially with his sound, I think that he would be making some of the best films that we've ever seen. And there are moments in this movie where you feel like you're watching one of those. You feel like you're watching one of the best films that has been made in a long time. And I will say, this film is infinitely better than Barbie. goodness gracious, infinitely better than Barbie. It's also, I would say, significantly better than the vast majority of movies that have come out. But if you had to ask me, hey, would I rather go watch Mission Impossible 7 or Oppenheimer again? I'm going Mission Impossible 7. And would I rather go watch my favorite movie of last year, Top Gun Maverick, or this? I'd rather go Top Gun Maverick. And you could say, well, they're two different stories, two different ways of storytelling. And I would agree, but there are also other dramas too that I would be much more drawn to, even coming out over the last few years, more so than this movie. It's not to say the movie is bad. The movie is, I think, well crafted in various ways, but I think the runtime, and that ultimately comes from, I think, a very just kind of all over the place script, especially towards the very beginning, and also not having that pacing be as tight as it could have been, and some of those edits and cuts not being nearly as effective as one might think, ultimately leads me just to not being a huge fan of this film. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give this film still a solid B, leaning towards the B+ territory, because again, the acting is phenomenal. Cillian Murphy is fantastic in this. He shows clearly he's leading man material, that he is able to take on this character and become the character of Oppenheimer to a lesser degree in a very supporting role. Emily Blunt, especially towards the end, oh my goodness, she just starts to, knock your socks off. There's a part where she's in a scene where she's being interrogated and she just switches on and you're like, hey, say what you want about her and her real life persona, but you know what? On screen, she is still very, very good at what she does. Matt Damon is good. Robert Downey Jr. is also another shining character in this movie. Florence Pugh has a supporting role as well as many others. And honestly, the one that I probably was the most impressed by was David Krumholtz. For people that don't know David Krumholtz, he is known for Mr. Universe in Serenity. A big fan of that. He, of course, was in 10 Things I Hate About You. He's been in a lot of movies. You probably recognize him. He was also Joel Blicker in Addams Family Values. But this dude did great. And again, I almost asked, did he gain weight for this role? Did he put makeup on? And was that because the makeup team also did a great job? And if a lot of what he had on his face was makeup, hey, kudos to that team, but also kudos to him because he was able to also give a really good supporting performance. Again, he's not a lead by any means, but he was very, very solid. And really all the actors in this movie are fantastic. I also just want to add one more thing, which is that there is a random sequence, a couple of sequences where there is nudity, sexuality. And honestly, I just don't feel like that did much of anything. And it really does it for most movies. For most movies, whenever you have those things in there, they typically don't add much. You could have taken those moments out and it wouldn't have changed the story. It would not have really had an impact on the story itself. You could have talked about Oppenheimer as this womanizer character by the line that's in the movie itself, calling him a womanizer, and also just having shots of him clearly fading into a bedroom with somebody. You don't actually have to show that. And I think some people might say, well, it was very artistically done in different ways. But as you all know, that's kind of like one of the hangups that I have is when Hollywood especially gets so focused on those things. And luckily, it's a very, very, very small part of the movie. It's a 3-hour film, and that probably those sequences take up less than 5 minutes of screen time. But ultimately, hey, Cillian Murphy kills it on screen, and as do all of the other actors in this movie who do a great job. Kudos to the cinematographer, kudos to the visual effects team, and kudos to Nolan for doing some amazing stuff in this work, but not my favorite from him. What are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Oppenheimer? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, that fire button, smash the rumble button. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Monomator General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my subscribe star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank y'all very much for being my supporters at the Keep of the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.